Hi, a few of you came back. Maybe everyone else is still eating ice cream. But thank you all again for being here. I'm not going to go over what I said the first time about what the track is about, because all of you were here then. But I do, excuse me a moment, we're talking about transportation here, but obviously it's everything else as well. And we need to do it fast. We need to do it as collaboratively and collectively as possible. So that's what Drawdown Marin is about. It's aligned with the California state standards, and it's aligned with the philosophy behind Project Drawdown, although we started running with this before Paul's book came out. But it's about solutions instead of the sky is falling. Yes, we know the sky is falling, but we can't just continue to beat that drum and say, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. We need to have solutions. So that's what Drawdown Marin is about. I hopefully got a few people out there to see the Marin Transit on-demand van. It will be out there for just a little bit longer, but go to your phones if you have a chance, or write this down and download the app. And it's being piloted now in sort of a short area around San Rafael and Terra Linda, but it will be expanding in 2019. So without further ado, you guys know who I am, so I don't need to tell you that again. I want to actually find out more about who's in the room. Actually, I know who's in the room because you guys were here last time. Never mind. But one of the questions that we asked at the beginning of the last session was, I'm not going to ask you how you got here today, because I don't want to embarrass anyone who drove an internal combustion engine like I did. Yeah, me too. But how will you get where you need to go in 2025? A mere 6 or 7 years from now. So that's kind of huge, and that's that forward thinking for the 21st century is really what we're trying to talk about. So I'm missing one of my folks. Emailed me at 5:30 this morning and said she was sick, so Bernadette Austin will not be here. But we have a fine panel led by Gia Brazil Vacin. It's Vacin. I want to say Vacin, but Vacin.
You're like one of the few that actually decided on the right.
That is the right.
That is.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
She is the ZEV Infrastructure Project Manager at the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, otherwise known as Go-Biz. She's got some moves. Yeah. She's doing the infrastructure for zero emission vehicles for the state of California. That's a really big deal. And as we've heard, and we probably all know too well, the ZEV market demand, the governor's goal is 5 million ZEVs on California's roads by 2030. We might be able to do better than that, given what we heard from Doron Moran from the Center for Climate Protection. The adoption rate has been so fast in the last 6 months to a year, so we may be able to beat that 2030 goal by something significant. Go-Biz works with the public and private partners to expedite infrastructure and identify opportunities for business engagement and growth. Gia holds a Master of Environmental Science and Management from UC Santa Barbara. At the other end is Bob Brown. He'll come second. That's okay. We were out of order here, but he's the Community Development Director of the City of Novato, has a decades-long career in planning and sustainability throughout the Bay Area. I met him first when he was working for San Rafael and did some amazing work there. He's as the Sustainability Coordinator for San Rafael, he authored the Climate Action Plan and one of the most stringent green building ordinances in the nation. He taught sustainable practices at Dominican University and holds a BS in environmental biology from the University of Santa Clara and a master's in urban and regional planning from San Jose State University. And Scott McDonald, next to Gia, works at the Transportation Authority of Marin, TAM, as the agency's senior transportation planner. His work supports Marin County employers and employees through programs and outreach regarding alternative transportation options, including transit, van pools, ride-sharing, biking, and walking, along with electric vehicles. Next to him is Brett Wiley from Marin Clean Energy, Marin MCE Clean Energy. He finds and assesses new opportunities on the cutting edge of the energy transition that focus on expanding electric vehicle charging infrastructure, ensuring low-income residents can access EVs, and demonstrating how distributed energy resources resources benefit customers and our grid. Brett holds a BS in biology from Truman State University and an MPA in Energy and Sustainable Development from Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs. So what I did with my last group was ask really fast questions, and if you were here, you can't just cheat. And you guys can think about this too. Without thinking, just quick answers. What is your personal favorite mode of transportation, Bob?
My new Tesla.
Yeah, okay. Brett?
Biking.
You know, I recently tried scooter sharing for the first time, and it was very, very fun. So
Was it? All right.
right now, it's my favorite.
Okay.
And I'll say walking too, but I love fuel cell electric vehicles, which you will hear more about from me
Yes, we
today.
will. Okay. Second question. Yeah, you that one goes at the end, those two, and the two of you can share that one. And then the second question is, think of an example, share an example of your favorite location anywhere in the world that's doing transportation right.
Well, I'd say the Netherlands, where they devote about half of their infrastructure to biking and ped. So it's pretty amazing.
Well, if you're in the first session, Norway would be the correct answer. But I'll throw a curveball out there. I'd say Portland. I was recently there for the first time for a conference. If you're into electric vehicles, you should really attend the Roadmap conference, which is every June. But they're actually unifying their planning with their infrastructure build out to make charging not so complicated. So I think they're working a little more holistically and really collaboratively, and I like what they're doing.
Actually, go ahead. However you want to do it.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with Bob. I think the Netherlands and Denmark, you know, the densities are a lot greater, but they encourage a lot more people to walk and bike. I took a train in Japan once, and the speeds of the trains were pretty impressive as well. So there are a lot of good examples out there.
Yeah, in the last session we heard the things that came to my mind too. I thought Davis is another great example, as well as we heard Amsterdam and Norway, so we've taken kind of the obvious ones. I will say just kind of around here, I think that San Francisco is a good example. I think there's many other things that they want to do and are doing, but I found it to be, you know, for a city, pretty easy to get around, easy to use public transportation, doesn't take a lot longer than other modes, which I think is key. In fact, sometimes it's faster, so I'll put them in the mix.
Wow. You want to come up?
Yeah.
All right.
Spit in here. I do it this way. How's that? Can you hear me all right? Okay, great. So I know that we're going to hear kind of more local level activities, and I thought I could just spend some time talking about what's happening at the state level and some of the actions that have been happening in under the Brown administration, and we're coming to a close there. So get your tissues out, but we have some good leaders in line, hopefully. So I'll kick us off and see where we go together. I was also going to ask you how you got here, but taking Leslie's cue, I won't embarrass anybody, but I will admit that I did drive myself here by myself in my eyes. So I'm part of the choir, and that obviously means we have a long way to go just among our own community, right? So for those of you who aren't familiar with Go-Biz, it was created by Governor Brown in 2012, and it's intended to be California's single point of contact for economic development and job creation efforts at the state level. So what does that really mean? I'll just spend a minute here on this. We kind of have 4 core functions. We have several units, but the functions are around site selection. So we provide free kind of tailored service for businesses that either want to come to California or expand in California for site selection in terms of you know, if it's manufacturing or whether it's some kind of other business to help with that, working with the real estate agents and things like that to find the appropriate locations. We do incentive identification, so finding state-sponsored initiatives or incentives or financial assistance programs, so that could come in the form of mechanisms for accessing capital or sales and use tax exemptions, things like that. We can help navigate across different agencies. There's a lot of different groups that are at play when you're coming to California or you're expanding your business here, so we can help sort of streamline that communication. And then in workforce development, so we have a great highly skilled workforce. And I think in the first session we heard a lot of UC graduates. There's some here, so we have great community colleges and a great university system. And it also is around work, employee training and hiring processes and things like that. So really, based on whatever the needs are of the business, we should be able to help kind of navigate business here in California. And then I work in the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Unit that sits in Go-Biz. And this needs to be updated to our goal of 5 million ZEVs by 2030. And so we look at accelerating infrastructure to do that. And we do that by coordinating state efforts. We have agency alignment meetings to make sure that we can kind of roll this out in a unified manner. We collaborate with the public sector and private sectors a lot to try to align kind of needs with what's happening, public policy needs with what's happening in the business world. We track and expedite hydrogen plug-in infrastructure to see kind of where it is, where it needs to go, learn from private sector, and then looking for identification of opportunities to expand business opportunities and engagement and growth. And then, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, I know that the title of our session has economic growth in it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that aspect, but one of the reasons that the ZEV unit sits inside of Go-Biz is because we do see that there's a business case there, and we do need to think about how we can grow the economy and decarbonize at the same time. And we have managed to lower our greenhouse gas emissions while increasing our economy. And you'll hear recently at the Global Climate Action Summit, I heard Governor Brown say, we're the 5th largest economy, right? Number 1 is the US, of which California is a part, right? And so, and then it falls down to California. So we've managed to put all these kind of big aspirational targets in place and still grow our economy. So I think that we need to keep that in the backdrop. So California has a long history of air quality and pollution challenges, and that really set the stage for putting forth aggressive air quality standards, and you can see that that's been working. And this is 35 years later, 1980 in Los Angeles, 35 years later. That might be a beautiful, exceptionally clear day in LA, but you get the point. And this really created an opportunity for pushing progressive policy forward and asking the private sector to step up, and in many cases, they exceeded expectations. So thinking about today as climate change arguably being our biggest global threat, Governor Brown has kind of set forth the climate strategy and has a vision of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, and in fact 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. So within these 6 kind of key pillars, reducing, anyway, the second one over, 50% reduction in petroleum use in vehicles. So I'm highlighting this because this is the lens that I look through a little bit more, but I think that you'll hear about some of these other aspects. Either you've heard about it today, and maybe through our panelists will talk about it. And knowing that 50% of our emissions comes in California from transportation, I think this is obviously a focal point. And I think that the way that we look at it is in zero emission transportation and technologies are really kind of the only way to address the needs and achieve these goals. There it is. I forgot animation. So that's what we're talking about today. So now we're taking it a step farther, right? Like, fast forward to September, right? And so over the past couple of years, beginning in 2017, beginning of 2017, I'm not totally sure why, wink, wink, why it might have been right around inauguration time, that we see Governor Brown really step into the spotlight even stronger in commitment to combating climate change. So right before the summit kicked off, we had Governor Brown sign SB 100, right, which commits California to 100% of the electricity obtained from renewable and zero carbon energy sources by 2045. And that same day, he also signed Executive Order B 5518, right, which basically asks California to become carbon neutral no later than 2045, he'd like it sooner, and to maintain a net negative greenhouse gas emissions thereafter. So this isn't legally enforceable like in the same way that SB 100 is, but I think it really sends a clear message to the world. You know, it underscores the importance of having this kind of laser focus on slowing and ultimately reversing the effects of climate change. So quickly, a couple of ZEV executive orders that have come out of this administration. In 2012, we had V16 2012, which was the executive order that set the 1.5 million ZEVs on the roads by 2025. And it also was the executive order that set the transportation goal of 80% below 1990 levels, GHG emissions for transportation, 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. And then this January we had B4818, which was what raised our target to, I see I have a typo there, not 1.5, it should say 5 million ZEVs. And it also, for the first time ever, set infrastructure targets, which we hadn't had before. So 200 hydrogen stations and 250,000 chargers, 10,000 of which would be DC fast chargers. It also directs state agencies to work with regional and local governments to streamline permitting and a number of other things, update the ZEV action plan, ensure affordable and accessible, affordability and accessibility, things like that. So it has some other pieces in it. So one of the ways that this has been playing out at the state level is through our zero emission vehicle action plans. In 2013, Governor Brown released the first one, which was essentially a kind of a to-do list that agencies could take action on things that we have some control over to accelerate ZEV adoption. And so the sections in that were kind of around consumer awareness, affordability, infrastructure development, economic and job opportunities from ZEV technologies. And then in just 3 years, we realized that the agencies had actually achieved a lot of these actions, and it was time for kind of an update and a refresh. So in 2016, the ZEV action plan was released. It essentially, the sections were the same with a few exceptions. It added the medium and heavy duty sectors to each of them and how that plays into this. It adds throughout the document more around accessibility of ZEV technology, so car sharing, public transit, and access to infrastructure by sort of a broader group of citizens. And it adds 2 new sections, going beyond California. So how do we help translate lessons and encourage ZEV adoption in other states and other countries around the world? And then lead by example, which is really greening the state's fleets, what our own targets are. It's the walk the talk section of the ZEV action plan. And then in 2018, just in September, we released a priority update. So it's basically an extension of the 2016 action plan, and it consists of 39 actions that agencies are really focused on through the end of this administration and in the nearer term that can help accelerate ZEV adoption. And so the majority of these are new actions that were identified as needs over the past couple of years, and the rest are just kind of updated versions of this is still important, we still need to work through it. But the 2016 plan remains active too. So when we talk about ZEVs, we mean everything from motorcycles to Class 8 trucks. We also mean plug-in, and we mean fuel cell electric vehicles as well. We hear a lot in the last session, if you were here, we heard a lot about electric vehicles. I didn't hear anybody say anything about fuel cells.
I knew you were coming.
Right? This is why Leslie invited me. And so really the state perspective is that if our goal, and it is to end use of internal combustion engines, we need all technologies, right? They are complementary. They serve different purposes. Some's overlapping, but we need all the technologies that we can to achieve our goals. And so, we hear a lot about, who's ahead, who's in front. I mean, in legislature and different places, right? Like, why should we invest in hydrogen technology? We already have batteries, right? And to me, that just is not a satisfying answer. I think that we really need to work together to end ICE, right? The ice age, as we've been saying today.
Good turn.
Ice means a lot of things these days.
It sure does. It sure does. So insert whatever visual you want in that, what I'm saying. So just quick market stats, and this may be, again, things that you guys are already familiar with, but we have nearly, we lost the values there.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So it says 52% other states, 48% California, and we have, we have nearly half of the entire, ZEV market here in California. And this isn't an accident. It's a commitment by stakeholder groups and really, looking to grow this market. So we have coming up on 500,000 ZEVs. 5,300 of those are fuel cell electric vehicles. We have about 5,000 level 2 DC fast charge stations in California, and we have 35 hydrogen stations with 30 more currently funded through the state. I'm going to talk a little bit more about hydrogen just to give it a little airtime here. This little panel at the bottom you might recognize it comes from Veloz, and they track sort of the sales. And Veloz, if you're not familiar with it, VELOZ is a kind of public education and awareness and outreach group that's aimed at helping to accelerate ZEV adoption. So we have the world's first retail hydrogen network. And this came about in 2012. The California Fuel Cell Partnership developed a roadmap which kind of described the launch of the early fuel cell market. And in 2013, AB8 created the Alternative Renewable Fuel Vehicle Technology Program, or ARIVTP. It gave funding authorities to build at least 100 stations. And there is currently about up to 20 million per year to do this. And so the stations that exist today are heavily funded by the state. I think on paper, it's about 75% of capital costs and then some additional O&M. I say real in parentheses or in quotes here because when you take into account the project overruns, the extra time spent, and the actual amount of money that's going into these stations, it's closer to a 50-50 split. And the state has invested $131.6 million so far, and we're expecting another grant funding opportunity later this year. So here's a map of the stations in Northern California. The green dots are, can you see that? Okay, yeah. The green dots are those stations that are actually open. The yellow dots are those that are in development, and you'll see that Mill Valley up there in the corner has a station. And if you think about only 35 stations being open, that's actually a pretty big deal. San Francisco, you can see in the Bay Area, in our part of the Bay Area, there's not really that many open stations right now. There are many under development. San Francisco will have 3. Oakland just recently broke ground. So anyway, and there's many in the South Bay. So,
in the North Bay.
Pardon me?
Further north?
Farther in the north, no. We have Walnut Creek, which is, I know, on the other side, and then 3 stations in Sacramento. So, but as we build the network out, I think you'll see that there'll be more proposals for building out farther up in the North Bay. And it really focused initially on core markets, greater LA, Bay Area, and then some connector stations. Coalinga is our main connector right now. There's another station that will be in Santa Anela, and then we have like San Diego and Truckee for sort of destinations. But as that gets built out, yes.
Are these targeting medium heavy duty, like you said in the previous slide? So it sort of indicated that it's sort of like hydrogen will work better for medium heavy duty. Is that your?
It does work better for medium heavy duty for the batteries that exist now. It also works great for light duty, and it also works great for it's longer range, faster fueling. It's easier to build a bigger platform. A larger vehicle. So this is actually for light duty build out. The hydrogen community is looking at and developing more on the heavy duty imports. Toyota has a Class 8 truck. You guys might have heard of Nikola. They have a Class 8 truck as well. So, and the reason I kind of shy away from saying yes is because I don't want to just give the impression that, okay, fuel cells are for medium heavy duty, great, get out of the light duty space. I think that there's really room for light duty vehicles too, right? I mean, we talked about having some limitations, right? Like we can't use public transportation because we have to go to soccer and pick up the kids, and we have to do this, we have to take care of our ailing parents, or somebody said that in the last group. And I think the same potentially goes, right? Maybe we don't have a half an hour charge our car, or we haven't thought about it, that kind of thing, right? It's 3 to 5 minutes to fill your car here. It's much more like a typical gasoline experience now in a fuel cell car. And it's an electric drivetrain, and so it's also quiet and all of that. Here's the Southern California stations. So I said there's 35 open. We're seeing acceleration in development. What used to take like 3 years is now taking 18 months maybe. So we anticipate maybe 5 or 7 more open and then by like early 2019. And the hydrogen community has a pretty big vision, right? Right now we have here, you can see 35 stations, about 5,000 fuel cell electric vehicles. They have recently, through the California Fuel Cell Partnership, which is a public-private membership-based organization, developed a revolution document, kind of vision document of sorts on, and their vision for 2030 is 1 million vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, supported by a network of 1,000 stations across California. Now, 1,000 stations in California, and the Air Resources Board has done a lot of modeling about how you would place this, for light duty would basically provide the same services as the 8,000 gas stations up in California. And so that's part of that thinking there. And this is ambitious, but achievable. But it would really put fuel cell vehicles kind of firmly in the marketplace and help bring the costs down, et cetera. So I'm happy to talk more about that. I could talk about it all day, but in the interest of time, I'll move forward. And I have a copy of the document that the Fuel Cell Partnership put out, which is pretty interesting. They have pathways for how to scale, and it's all about scale and what does that mean, and what do the commitments need to be from the private sector and the public sector to achieve that. Okay, renewable hydrogen. Sometimes we hear like, oh, it's the dirty fuel, right? Well, yes and, maybe not yet, sort of and. So SB 1505 already requires hydrogen to be at least 33% renewable for state-funded fueling stations, which is all of them right now. And on average, developers are actually exceeding that. And then at the Global Climate Action Summit, the Hydrogen Council, which is top executives of the massive corporations around the world, made a commitment of decarbonizing 100% of hydrogen used in transportation by 2030. So that's a big deal. And it really will, I think that this will all start to play out. This was before knowing what California's goals were under SB 5518.
Fast question, just
Yes.
I don't know if everyone is aware of this, but explain how hydrogen is produced now and why decarbonizing it is a hoped for goal.
Mm-hmm. Most of the hydrogen produced now is done through steam methane reformation, right? So it takes methane and reforms it, separates it, and there is some carbon that is produced, carbon dioxide that's produced out of that, and emissions out of that. You can also, that's the majority of what's produced now, and mostly what's supplied to us is from industrial gas companies that actually are selling hydrogen for other kinds of things, petroleum refining, for other types of industrial uses. And the transportation sector right now is kind of getting, what's left over. There are so it's important to think about other ways to produce hydrogen. We can split water through electrolysis, right, and create oxygen and hydrogen using electrolyzers. And there's a big opportunity, this is going beyond your question, but there's kind of a big opportunity when we talk about the sort of overproduction of renewables in the middle of the day. There's absolutely an opportunity to take that and store it in the form of hydrogen and use it later for transportation, to use it, later today, tomorrow, or 6 months or 8 months from now, right? So we can think about places where we produce a lot of renewables, even more so maybe seasonally, and storing it and using it for other uses. You can think about emergency response type situations. There's just a lot of applications which we don't even have time to touch on today, but come and visit me, or I'll come visit you if you want to talk more about it. Okay, so I don't want to ignore the plug-in side because I love both of my children, just differently. So there's a lot going on in the PEV infrastructure space too. I think that you've heard more about that, and I think some of our panelists have some more to say about that. But just to touch on a few things, California was the first jurisdiction in the world to set charging infrastructure targets based on vehicle targets. So we, state agencies, it was actually CEC, used EVI Pro to look at what would you need for 1.3 million plug-in cars, what kind of infrastructure would you need for that? And that's what informed the executive order of the 250,000 chargers. And now this infrastructure target has really helped kind of solidify and bring something for the private sector to kind of mobilize around, right? And so it's really brought a lot of commitments at the Global Climate Action Summit. There were commitments from for worldwide for 3.5 million chargers, and that's a big deal. SB 350 enabled utilities to take a leadership role in terms of being able to invest in transportation electrification. We have programs like the Cali VIP, which is funding available, but working at the local level to put infrastructure in place. They have, I think, 39, let me just check here, 39 million right now, potentially up to 200 million for infrastructure and local. Right now they're working in Fresno, so electrifying that part of California. And then this should say that VW settlement, so under Electrify America, California will have 800 million over the next 10 years for infrastructure and education, other kinds of things. But the great majority of that's going to go towards batteries, not fuel cell. So this slide, I think, does a great disservice because there's so many things that we could point to. But the point of this that I want to make is that local actions are key, right? We could have all of this going on, and if there weren't actions and activities and things happening on the ground, and places like Drawdown Marin and things that are happening in San Francisco and around the Bay Area in California, it doesn't matter, right? So we'll maybe touch on this more in questions. Move this along for now. And then just to we started to talk about this a little bit more in the last session, but mobility means so much more than just zero emission vehicles, right? We need to think about how do we make affordable and accessible options that meet the needs of everybody and where they need to go and how they want to get there. We need to think about what kinds of trade-offs there are, right? So I have a couple of examples here. The HOV sticker is great, it's an attractive incentive, but it also encourages us maybe to drive by ourselves in our car, right? And that's creating more congestion. We think about, okay, we can have EV-only zones, right? They're doing that in Norway. I think San Francisco was kind of throwing around that idea. But what happens to the people that can't afford ZEVS? How do they get to their jobs in a way that is fair? And then we think, space-limited areas, right? This is help with congestion if we have EV-only parking and there's other cars that aren't able to park there. So just thinking about kind of unintended consequences or the trade-offs that we have around making these decisions. And then this optimal versus typical solution set, we were talking about this before too. So typical behavior, right, might be drive by myself in my car, have a second car, maybe do a ride share, Lyft type of thing. Then it might be like bike, walk, or public transit. And I think that maybe this room might be a little bit of an exception, but in general that might be typical behavior. So how do we flip that on its head and think about making it the optimal solution set? We're walking or biking or we're taking public transportation, and then we're thinking about cars after that. And so that's a challenge to us. I don't have the answer to that, but that's a social challenge that I think that we have. And then that really just kind of requires this social shift in our definition of mobility. And we talked in the last session about this emotional connection to our cars, right? Our freedom and our sort of individuality and that kind of thing. And so, where I could save money if I get an Uber pool, but I'm gonna share my car with a stranger. I wanna read my phone by myself, right? It's like, we need to think about, well, maybe we should put the phone down and talk to a stranger, because that's something that we don't do very much anymore, right? So there are some of these ways that we want to think about how to shift our society in that way. And then I'll just kind of leave us with, partnership enables success. Ultimately, we will not succeed in silos. We will not succeed from sitting in Sacramento and saying dun da da da, here's the beautiful solution for everybody, without working together to do that. And so we need these supportive policy frameworks to encourage innovation And but we need to get the feedback and the input of what are those things, what are those enabling factors, what are the types of policy frameworks that could support the business case, and what are the needs and challenges that you're facing. And then, on a personal scale, we talked about this too already, but there's little things we can do, right? What we can offer telecommuting to our employees, we can put in workplace charging, we can think about mobility incentives, paying for part of public transit, or thinking about how do we use Lyft or Uber, how could we maybe, cities could partner with some kind of ride share to offer a discount or a free if you ride in a ZEV, or, those kinds of things. And so obviously this is a very short list, and we could probably do an entire day workshop just on this part of it. But I think you get the point. And then thinking bigger picture, society needs to prepare for this transition. We've been in the internal combustion engine world for a long, long time, and we're attached to it. And we have inertia, right? Let's face it. So we need to think more about public outreach and education. I think a lot of places you go, people don't even know about a ZEV. I mean, how many people even know that we had a fuel cell and electric hydrogen network in California? Okay, yay! I can't tell you how often people are like, what is that? What is a fuel cell? And I love that question because it's fun to answer, but I answer it too often, I think. We need to think about developing the future workforce, and here's our opportunities in kind of economic development. We can leverage the community college network and training and job placement and those kinds of things, but what are the needs, right? We don't need mechanics that can fix a transmission anymore. We don't need people that are changing oil, right? If we're talking just about ZEVs. So thinking about that, we need to sort of deepen our political support. We've had, the Brown administration has obviously been very, very focused on this. I think that we have a good chance of having continued support here in climate change and other aspects. But we're thinking about just also the legislature, right? We don't have, there are still those that aren't really believers of all technologies and technology neutrality. We can use our voting power. Somebody mentioned no on Prop 6. Yes, I agree. It would eliminate a really powerful tool that I believe we need. And we also need you to help us understand what the needs are, right? So this is dialogue, and we can't do it alone. So with that, I'll just say I invite you to connect with me and with us, and let's go make the future. Thank you.
Okay. So we've heard a lot about a lot of sexy technological solutions today. Well, now for something completely different.
Make it sexy.
So I'm going to talk about another piece of the mobility puzzle, and that's land use. And Leslie promised to have us move along, and she's going to pull out her whip. So I'm going to move quickly. We'll talk a little bit about the land use component here. And in my opinion, the basic problem that we're facing is a lack of balance in our land use. So since the recession, we have added about 500,000 jobs in the Bay Area, only 65,000 housing units. So you can't do the math. That's about one housing unit for every 8 jobs. That is not sustainable at all. Not economically, not socially, certainly not in terms of mobility. So what the state tells us is to accommodate this job growth, this household formation, we need to be producing about 180,000 housing units statewide a year. We've only been doing about half of that, and maybe now today, in the last year or so, maybe getting up to about 2/3, but we're still a ways short. And then we add, losing 5% of the housing stock in upper Sonoma County doesn't help at all. So how are we doing here in Marin? It's not a great story. In our last housing element reporting period, countywide, we only met about 1/3 of our housing commitment. And I'm very embarrassed to say in my community, in Novato, only about 1/4. San Rafael, half of that. The big achiever was Corte Madera. And they took it in the shorts over their Tampa Vista apartments.
With the ugliest thing in the city.
But nonetheless, they met their goals. Good for them.
Not that ugly.
Yeah, and you definitely took some blistering shots for doing that. So, sort of my philosophy, the big disconnect that I experience in talking to people about land use and transportation is, most everybody really wants a vital economy. Pretty much everyone will agree on that. Well, the trouble is that means we're creating more jobs, and those workers need a place to live, duh. And the problem is that residents don't really object a lot to the job growth. In many cases, that's across the freeway, it's not in their immediate vicinity, but they do object to the housing. And in most cases, the housing is probably closer to home, it's more kids in their schools. They just feel the impact of more housing, and they object to it. So, developers are not fools. They're going to satisfy that demand wherever it's cheaper and easier. That typically means out in the fringes. And we get long commutes. So, that's the basic problem that we face in terms of the public's perception about all this. They don't connect. So, since World War II, we've developed in a pretty consistent way. And this shows the urbanized area of the Bay Area. And we've just spread out and out and out in a very low density manner. And our transportation network simply hasn't been able to keep up with that, and it can't. So the way we develop makes a big difference. So let's look at three different scenarios. One is urban, I'll call it, about 50 units an acre. You'd see this kind of development in, say, Walnut Creek or Oakland. Compact development, it's about 14, 15 units an acre. I think this is a really comfortable density, in our town centers, in suburbia, or sprawl, typical sprawl. So in terms of the amount of land you got to devote to these different land uses for 100 housing units, huge difference. And then we look at carbon emissions. The amount of carbon that's produced in a sprawl situation is double what a compact development scenario would generate. So big difference in carbon. Big difference in vehicle miles traveled. About a third as much for a compact development as sprawl. And then in terms of the amount of household income that's going to transportation, again, significant difference. The difference between that 19 and 25% is probably about $9,000 or $10,000 per year per household. So again, in rising housing prices, that kind of money makes a huge difference to families. We know from all kinds of studies that density and the amount of trip generation are highly related. We also know from a lot of studies that people really value more living in a walkable neighborhood near transit services. And those housing units have more value. They're priced higher. Really when you think about it, our American cities and towns are really sort of in their adolescent phase, right, in terms of time. What we really need to do is we need to grow up a bit more and be a little more mature, I think, like the European cities that we really love to go visit and come home to our low-density suburban neighborhoods. So, again, I think we have something to aspire to and models to follow. So let me shift from problems to solutions. I think that's what we really need to be talking about. So let's talk about the regional solution here in the Bay Area, the way that ABAG and MTC propose to prioritize infill development is through Plan Bay Area. And this going back to the urbanized area of the Bay Area, this is where growth would occur under Plan Bay Area. So it really is intended to be infill within the existing fabric of developed suburbia and our larger cities. So Plan Bay Area, if its forecast can be realized, about 3/4 of housing growth is going to occur in these self-certified priority development areas that cities elect to designate. And about half of our total housing would be in the three big cities of San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose. So that's the objective Bay Area wide. Here in Marin, we only really have two priority development areas, downtown San Rafael and Marin City. So the way that ABAG and MTC intend to incentivize the realization of these PDA development projections is really through doling out infrastructure money. And so the One Bay Area grants that come out of these, 75% will go, these are discretionary transportation and land use planning funds. 75% will go to PDAs. And again, these would fund various mobility options or quality of life improvements. And just by example, San Rafael has received upwards of $10 million as a result of their PDA designation. So we're talking about some significant incentive dollars. So the state, how is the state approaching this? Well, obviously there are some funds for some zippy transportation options, but in terms of land use, a couple of key strategies from the state. One is getting CEQA out of the way of housing development approvals. And they've made attempts, but they then, they give and then they sort of roll back. And so they exempted CEQA review within a half-mile of transit facilities, but then due to the pressures of lobbyists from the environmental groups and trial lawyers, they heap on all kinds of exceptions. So this isn't really as robust an option as we had hoped. And then they stopped including parking impacts as real environmental impacts. So that's a small benefit. But the main thing the state's trying to do is really just get government out of the way to really reduce local discretion and NIMBYism in development approval processes. So one way of doing that was they modified the Housing Accountability Act, which has been around for decades. Basically, it now says that cities absolutely cannot reduce density. And they can't add on all kinds of conditions to a project that would essentially do the same thing. And they have to base their decision-making on what are being called objective standards. So these are things that are in writing, not the squishy, we don't like this design for these various reasons, or we're getting all kinds of pressure from the public, so we're going to deny this or reduce the density. Not feasible, and cities that try to use that kind of authority inappropriately, there's some very serious financial penalties. So it's really a different day for locals. So what are cities doing? Well, as I say, this is kind of a paradigm shift for cities where we had really complete discretion in our land use authority. Now the demand is for certainty. So what tools can we utilize to provide that and still not give up total control or give up the character of communities? Well, one way is form-based codes. So we're trying one of these in Novato. This is the Northwest Quadrant neighborhood, and it is just adjacent to our downtown. It's between our two SPART stations, right next to the new bus facility downtown. So it's in a great location for some densification. And that's not the way that things have played out over the past several decades. So this neighborhood was subdivided and largely developed back in the early 1900s, right next to downtown. It was the early part of Novato. Then unfortunately, the 60s happened. And this was under county jurisdiction at the time. Not to berate the county, this happened in San Rafael and Gerson Park and a lot of other communities. But not the real prime time for architecture in America. And so in this neighborhood, this is about half the development that's there. So half of it are the nice little cute bungalows, half of it is this. So the reaction in Novato with the city council back in the 70s was to say that if there's an existing single-family home in this neighborhood, you can't tear it down. So this neighborhood essentially has been cast in amber for 40 years. So we're trying to reverse that. So the idea is trying to promote what's sort of now being called missing middle housing. And these are the kinds of housing developments that used to be built in the 30s and 40s. So they're the duplexes, the triplexes, fourplexes, cottage court developments, things you will see in Berkeley and Alameda and some of the older neighborhoods. And they really work really well. It's a comfortable density that works with single family and yet provides some multifamily opportunities. And so what we've done is we're creating zoning standards for these different building types, and developers then can choose from them. And this really essentially then gives them essentially a guarantee. If you develop this way in this neighborhood, which we think is compatible, you essentially are going to get a free pass on design review. So this is the concept with form-based codes. And I think we'll be seeing more of these because, again, the pressure is providing certainty in a very subjective realm. Another option is precise plans. So San Rafael is going through its general plan update, really trying to figure out what it wants to be when it grows up, which is happening rapidly. And so they're really going to do a precise plan in their downtown to figure out what the next generation of mixed use looks like, so they can incentivize and really make use of their transit facilities, et cetera. Another option is adding mixed use to malls and office complexes. And I think this is a no-brainer. We don't do this, any of this as planners. The economy is driving this. We're really over-retailed in the U.S. Compared to Europe, we have 5 times more retail per capita than Europe does. And when you add on internet sales to that, you know, the future is obvious. In fact, it's projected that about a quarter of our shopping mall space is going to be closing in the next few years. So that's an opportunity. It's an impact, but it's also an opportunity. Let me go one more. So in the Northgate Mall, for example, here in San Rafael, the new ownership is a bit more enlightened than the last, and they've done a lot of surveying. They're looking at the economics, but they would like to add housing to that mall experience. In Nevada, we've got the Fireman's Fund complex, which was mentioned earlier. It's 700,000 square feet of empty space. You've got about a 26% office vacancy in Nevada. It's not going to get filled. This complex is pretty much obsolete. So all the discussions that we're having with developers really talk about adding housing. And just like Northgate Mall, which is within walking distance of a smart station, this site is directly across from a smart station. So it's a huge opportunity to do something much more innovative and much more exciting. And then lastly, again, looking a little further into the future, we're talking about autonomous vehicles. Well, in terms of land use, I think that the holy grail will be the reuse of parking lots. So parking lots, parking structures are about anywhere between a quarter and a third of our land area in most cities. So that's just a gigantic opportunity in 5 to 10 years to, again, start adding more mixed use in previously developed areas. So that's just some quick ideas so we can have further discussion about land use. All right.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So you heard Bob talk a fair amount about the land use realities and changes that are needed in the future. I'm going to follow up by talking a bit about some of the opportunities to move more people into new mobility options, including shared transportation options, active transportation options, to improve our transportation system here in Marin County. So just quick background to TAM before I dive into the topic. Transportation Authority in Marin provides planning and funding for a wide range of transportation projects and programs in Marin, including road improvements, public transportation. We have a Safe Routes to Schools program, crossing guard program. We've invested heavily in electric vehicles, including electric buses now in Marin Transit and EV charging stations for the public. And also we have a variety of programs to try to encourage more people to either not drive or to switch from driving alone to another mode of transportation. So this diagram I developed, it shows the variety of factors that surround people's decisions when they're considering new mobility options. Traditionally, as Bob mentioned, land use and densities play a big role in people's decision making. Quality of transit along with that, bike infrastructure, pedestrian infrastructure, and of course parking. That might be the elephant in the room, the vast amount of parking you see. It's very accessible, often free. It certainly encourages driving. But recently, new innovative mobility options, technologies such as app-based services, rideshare platforms have started to open people's mind and got them thinking maybe they don't absolutely need to drive. So just by a show of hands, how many of you in the room have used an app-based service such as Uber or Lyft, or use an app to access bike sharing or scooter sharing? And that's about what we see in most discussions like this, almost 100% of you. So these have really taken off. They started to take hold in urban core and moved out throughout the region as a popular mode for a lot of people. So in Marin, we see this as a real opportunity to provide more options to people, connect to our core public transportation system, and reduce vehicle miles traveled and parking pressures. And we've really embraced these technologies and incorporated them into a lot of our programs to encourage people to not drive alone. One example is our Lyft Get Smart 17 pilot program, many of you have probably heard about. This is a program we set up really as a test to try to provide another option for people to get to and from the smart stations in Marin County. People get a $5 off coupon when they enter the Get Smart 17 code on the Lyft app. TAM and Lyft partnered to promote that code and really exceeded our expectations, the demand for that program. We're seeing over 1,000 trips a month and proud to offer that here in Marin County. We also have a Vanpool incentive program. Vanpools, for many of you are not as familiar with them, it's like a carpool with 7 or more passengers. So this could be a great option for long distance commuting. We have about 37 vans that have formed since we set up the program, but these are cutting back on long distance drive alone trips. The average trip distance is 90 miles round trip, so we have people coming from Sacramento to San Quentin in a Vanpool every day, so that can make a big impact. So we're offering $3,600 for people who form a van, and that's paid out over 2 years to help sustain that mode of transportation. We're also promoting car sharing. And TAM established a public-private partnership model with Zipcar and Whistle Stop in downtown San Rafael. There's currently one site right next to the Smart Station on Whistle Stop's property, and Zipcar is looking to expand throughout Marin County with possible sites at other Smart Stations, College of Marin, possibly Sausalito. So stay tuned. We also offer an emergency ride home program as an insurance program for people who take the bus, walk, carpool, vanpool, any alternative to driving alone. And if they get stuck, have to work late unexpectedly, have a sick child at home they have to attend to, we'll pay for up to 4 rides a year, $125 value, to give them the peace of mind that they're not going to get stuck at work. So that's a program that's offered directly to employees. They can take a taxi, Lyft, Uber, or equivalent to get home if they need to. Proud to say we're developing a Bikeshare program. Sonoma County and Marin County have teamed up. We're going to launch that. Initially, it's going to focus on connections to SMART, so people can leave their bikes at home and take a bike out. When they end their trip, they don't have to worry about it, and provides a midday option for people to get around during the day as well. All of these programs and transportation information we're going to provide through a new program we're going to call Marin Commutes. That program is going to launch around the first of the year. We're going to have dynamic incentives, campaigns, do outreach to employers through a one-stop shop portal, marincommutes.org. We can come out to organizations and do presentations at open enrollment period, benefits fairs, or any other event where this kind of information could be helpful. So this is kind of the countywide suite of programs we offer, but there are other things that are done by employers throughout the region to provide for their employees directly. I wanted to offer up some suggestions as well. Pre-tax benefits are probably the most common thing. The IRS allows employers to provide up to $260 that can be paid on a pre-tax basis for transportation expenses, that's either transit or van pooling. So that equates to about $3,000 a year pre-tax that employees can access if it's made available through their employers. Some employers directly subsidize the cost of transit and van pool expenses, or actually provide some type of shuttle or van pool, which has been explored by a lot of employers here in Marin County. Telework or compressed work week options are good for retaining and attracting employees. Sometimes they're informal programs, some more formal, but a lot of employers have allowed employees to work more remotely lately, especially in light of the strong economy and traffic. And finally, to promote carpooling, some employers have set up preferential carpool parking. We've established that with a couple large office parks. You can provide a carpool matching program specific to your organization. And then and you can also promote some of the programs that are provided countywide, like car sharing, emergency ride home, and bike parking and Bikeshare memberships might be something that you could offer when Bikeshare launches in Marin County. But with that, I'll answer questions after the presentations, but thanks so much.
Thanks, Scott. So I really like transportation starts with B's. To get here, I took the BART, and then I took the bus, and then I biked. But now I'm going to talk about battery electric vehicles, which are really great, and coming to Marin in droves. So MCE, we're your local electricity provider. And one way we're getting more involved in your electricity is in your transportation. So I'm just going to talk about preparing your business and our community for the coming and current EV revolution. A little bit first on MCE as a primer. As your local electricity provider, our main mission is addressing climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And as many people have already said, transportation is the largest share of our emissions, and so it's a big way that MCE can contribute to that, to our mission and to Marin County. For MCE, we have 4 main priorities: offering stable and competitive rates for our customers, providing local economic and workforce benefits. So again, hiring local on local renewable energy projects as an example. Providing energy efficiency programs. If you're a business or a multifamily property owner, we have a lot of efficiency programs for you right now. Rolling out in Q1 of 2019, we'll be offering efficiency programs for industrial and single family and agriculture. And renewable energy, pretty self-explanatory, but we also offer renewable energy programs through MCE. So why should you all care about EV charging? I'm going to be talking about three main topics: community infrastructure needs, serving customers in your business, and timely incentives. But I want to sort of level set where we're at now, because we need to talk about where we are today if we're going to talk about where we're going in the future. So today, there are roughly 200 DC fast charging level 2 stations in Marin County. This is sort of a rough estimate from this Department of Energy site, really great for planners. You should go to the U.S. Department of Energy's Alternative Fuel Data Center, a lot of data. So 200 charging ports. What does this actually mean? Well, the Electric Power Research Institute suggests that for every public port, these are public ports, should support 6 vehicles. So flip it on the other side, for every 6 vehicles, we need at least one public charging port. Well, if you do some little rough math, we have a significant gap in Marin County for the type of public infrastructure we need for charging. So this is taking 2017 data into account. The DMV publishes their registration data in the first of every year. And essentially, we have a gap of over 300 public charging ports in Marin County. If you've ever, who here drives an EV? Just show of hands. How many of you have had to wait to get to a charging station? 1, 2, 3, maybe? Okay, so some of you might have preferred charging spots you go to, but there's a lot of wait time, and there's also a lot of people not buying EVs because they don't know the infrastructure exists. This growth curve is pretty important and significant. It means that more EVs are coming on the road in Marin, and Marin was sort of an early adopter of EVs. But the total number of electric vehicles on the road, even if you include plug-in electric vehicles, which represents the blue bar, is still roughly 0.8, 0.9% of total vehicles in Marin County. So we have a long way to go of getting beyond the early adopter stage. And to do that, we have to make sure we're addressing the infrastructure needs to convince those non-early adopters, the middle market, to actually take a leap. Wanted to sort of give a big picture of the EV market. Some people have talked about that in the prior session, but just sort of the level set. This is what it looked like between 2011 and 2017, pretty steady growth curve. But what we're noticing now is in 2018, particularly with the release of the Model 3, is that we're sort of charging ahead, and we're going from a growth of about 29% annually to this year, quarter over last Q2 of this year compared to Q2 in 2017, 59% growth. Not to say that growth is going to be sustained, but also, as we talked about in prior sessions, there are going to be more models, electric vehicle models. So vans, sedans, SUVs, trucks, they're going on the market. We'll serve more markets than people that just need cars. These are all people that drive cars, and if you look on the road, that makes up not the largest share of total vehicles on the road. So going to 2030, it was previously mentioned that the goal is 5 million. If we did stay on the 29% growth rate, which is what we're seeing both in California total and in MCE service area, we would actually go over 7 million. But there's a big question mark as to how are we going to get there. And based on a national study, well, it's a national study, only 3 states were surveyed, but a lot of consumers were surveyed in California, and the 2 of the 3 largest barriers of adoption were charging infrastructure. So if we don't have charging infrastructure, essentially the majority of consumers say that they're not going to buy EVs. Cost is a big factor, but cost is less of a factor if you know about the incentives. And so we all in this room need to do a better job of creating awareness around consumers. But consumers individually can't take advantage of installing a public port. That's up to businesses, that's up to the public sector. I kind of noted here, unable to charge at home is at 30%. That's really critical because while some of you in here may not be multifamily property owners, a lot of California residents live in them, and it's very difficult for public charging stations to be put in them. One example is most multifamily properties have private parking, and giving up private parking in a multifamily building is really tough. So if we're going to encourage people to go from point A to point B to the workplace charging has to be a huge priority for Marin County and everyone in this room. And was noted previously, but I'll say it again because it's really critical. Workplace charging is critical because it provides a visible incentive for people to actually get an electric vehicle. DOE suggests that it's actually has a factor of 20, people are 20 times more likely to buy an EV if their workplace has charging. And if your workplace has charging, it can also serve your business. So I know there are a few businesses in here, there's other folks, but I think one way we need to start talking to workplaces about charging, especially retail workplaces or those that serve customers that come in and do business, is about how it can actually serve their business. So one of those ways is dwell time. The average US consumer spends 45 minutes on a shopping trip. Now, a shopping trip isn't going to get ice cream, doesn't hopefully take 45 minutes to get ice cream, but think about sort of your average shopping trip in a given week. US average is 45. For EV drivers, their average time they spend in a location is about 20 minutes longer than that. So that's 20 minutes more that a customer is coming and spending around in your store, or if you're talked about property owners before, there's a split incentive between multifamily property owners and tenants. There's a split incentive sometimes for businesses that want to provide these incentives in the property owners. Well, if a property owner invests in EV charging that serves multiple businesses, more of those businesses will get those customers service because they're going to spend longer time. Another thing we should talk about is returning customers. A lot of times businesses will offer sales or deals. Groupon, is not as common today because a lot of the businesses show that, well, they're not actually getting returning customers, they're just sort of one-time deal grabbers. But EV drivers actually do significantly return to retail sites. 43% in the survey by Fast Company and Volta showed that 43% of their EV drivers return to retail sites where they had charging stations weekly. So it's a really critical component for workplace charging. Another thing is an added revenue stream. Charging stations, especially networked level 2 charging stations, allow a company to not only recoup costs for their electricity, but you can actually charge customers a little more. There's not necessarily, there's some price sensitivity, but if you consider the cost of gas to electricity, consumers are already paying half as much for electricity as they would be gas. So there is some flexibility to charge customers a little more for the electricity and still bring in an additional revenue stream. Now, if you're looking to reduce costs, which probably a lot of businesses do, there's a significant opportunity, as also previously stated, to electrify your own fleet. So just wanted to sort of throw out some examples here, but getting EVs and chargers for your own fleet vehicles would reduce your fuel costs roughly by 50% given current fuel costs. It would also reduce your maintenance costs by 33%. So why is it that much? Well, EVs still have windows and tires need to be replaced, but EVs have 20 moving parts. Combustion engine has roughly 2,000 moving parts. So think about all the maintenance you have to do on all those moving parts and failure of those parts. So not only should workplaces focus on providing chargers for their own customers and staff, but also for their own business purposes. There's also a significant competitive advantage. How many of you are listed on Yelp or have used Yelp? Right? Majority of us. You all know it. You want to go somewhere, you type it in. It's in San Rafael. So I did this for San Rafael and found that, Redwood Credit Union, right in San Rafael, really great. I did the same search on Bikeshare, and Redwood Credit Union is also listed on PlugShare. EV drivers use PlugShare and other open source platforms to find charging stations. This is an opportunity to advertise your business. You can advertise, your parking rates. Redwood Credit Union, they have cost of $4 to charge. You can offer your dining. You can have a link to your website. You can, a way to advertise your business as a green business. And so a lot of people use Yelp right now. Yelp doesn't have a feature that clicks on, does this business offer EVs? That I'm guessing will probably be coming. If it's not, Yelp should really think about it. But right now, EV drivers use PlugShare. And if your business is listed, they're going to come to you. So going back to the previous comment about returning customers, if you're on PlugShare, you have a competitive advantage over everyone else that doesn't have chargers, and you're going to capture roughly 43% of drivers who come to you to return weekly. So those are some of the benefits. But what about the cost, you ask? Well, you're in luck. The last panel, the first session mentioned that these are very timely incentives, and multiple people said businesses should take advantage now. And you should, because these incentives won't last forever. Electrify America, their incentives go out for the next 4 years. I'll go through all these incentives in a sort of a high level. But in general, MCE wants to be sort of your one-stop shop for helping you find and navigate the electric charging infrastructure system, or the sort of ecosystem, I guess. So even though we have a charging program, even if it doesn't suit your business or your interests, we're happy to help you connect to other programs that do. So I'll just mention these briefly. MCEV, this is our charging program. We offer $2,500 per port for projects that are 2 to 20 ports. It covers hardware and or installation. We also offer a supplemental rebate to EV Charge Network, which is PG&E's ratepayer funded program. That program is for projects that are 10 or more ports. They cover the make-ready costs, essentially the poles to parking spots, and then we come in and offer a supplemental rebate on the hardware. Electrify America, their phase 2, or their phase 1 just ended this summer in August. Their phase 2 is rolling out in July. They have, in this coming 2-year cycle, they have $200 million to spend on EV infrastructure and consumer education. And so there's a lot of money on the table. In their past cycle, that reflects what's coming next. Everyone here, all the Bay Area, will be in their sort of incentive geographic area, and they focus on transportation corridors. So Nevada, for example, is one of their transportation corridor focus areas, and they offered 100% of the cost for the make-ready, the installation, and the hardware for charging. So again, their programs aren't fleshed out yet. They will be by July 2019, but just something to think about what's coming. The Bay Area Quality Management District just released today their guidelines for their new charge program for publicly accessible charging. And they offer everything from level 1, level 2 DC fast charge. They have adders. So if you're in a transportation corridor, you could get money. If you have solar on site, you'll get more money. If you add more than 1 port per project, you'll get an adder. The beautiful thing about EV Charge Network and BachMed and MCE, as well as HAM, is that all of these funds can be stacked. So just as an example, just sort of take the county of Marin. They just ribbon cut their project 2 weeks ago. Their project's initial price tag was about $170,000 for 41 ports, and their end cost was $7,000. So you don't have to have a 41 port project to rack up such a high cost to bring it down to $7,000. That's just an example of how these agencies are working together to make sure that the infrastructure that's put in the ground is affordable for workplaces. And I want to sort of note Tesla. It was noted previously that Tesla is a proprietary charging network, but if you looked at the growth of EVs, we do, Marin County and throughout the Bay, we do need to serve Tesla vehicles, which can charge at any charging station. But Tesla does offer a program for free chargers at destinations, so you should talk to Tesla after this if you're interested in their program and you have Tesla drivers. And there are more incentives to come. So all to say is my email is bwiley@mcecleanenergy.org. And if you want to find out how to connect to any of these programs, we'd be happy to help you navigate a very complicated but money-rich environment that is time limited. So don't sit on your hands and wait 2 years and think about the EVs that are coming on the road in the future. You should be building for the future now and in a way helping other people get on the road because you are building the infrastructure today. Thanks.